so transitioning to T. Would you actually be willing to go ahead and put up the poster so I don't have to between you? So we're gonna transition to T. And we typically start the tenderness session with a little recap of mindful walking like we would have just done. And then also those 3 relaxing sighs. So again, our strategy has been kind of a consistent breathing practice as a way to transition to the content and the group program, but then also adding in some different things. And so since we ended last week or last time with mindful walking, kind of doing some mindful walking to bring us back together. So we won't do that again now since we just did that, but just as a note. And then in particular with T is in the check-in where we really start to ask questions about whether people have noticed anything different since they've been learning and practicing mindfulness, either about yourself or the way that you're doing things, the way you're responding to things that you experience, aware of things in a different way. So asking questions to hopefully get at some of these issues about, like, yeah, I noticed when I bike mindfully that I actually really enjoy it, or and that you can tie some of that discussion to the themes that have been coming up. And so putting up our T poster here of learning to be kind to ourselves and recapping that we've really been focused on mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of thoughts, and also of feelings, and then talking about how we can use those strategies to help us cope with stressors and better manage them, kind of ride the waves of those stressful experiences. And also talked about how stress is just normal, just part of life, and it's something that we all have to get used to. And sometimes we have to do things that we don't want to do, and that we need to learn how to manage that and how to be productive. But that all of that can lead us to feel stressed out. And when we're stressed out for too long, we can really lose some of our personal balance. So the things that we focused on last week and those problems of chronic stress when they just add up and can really overwhelm our system. And also we've talked about how it's really important to remember that stress can come from inside ourselves. So we can create some stress even when there aren't stressors that are happening outside of our body. And that the body's stress response can be triggered by those things inside us, just like it's triggered by things outside of us. And when we're not aware of that, we can actually create and practice mental habits that don't do us any good, that can actually hurt us instead of help us. And some of these habits of mind, kind of transitioning to what we're going to talk about today, tenderness and how to be kind to ourselves, is that sometimes these habits of mind that we can practice include being very judgmental or unkind to ourselves. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about whether those tendencies can help us or hurt us. But first I want to ask you a question. What does the word practice mean to you? What's practice?
To do something over and over again.
Do something over and over again, so some repetition. Anything else to the idea of practice?
Trying to get better at it.
So often with the goal to improve. And what might someone practice and why? What are some things we practice?
Doing sports. They practice tennis.
Playing their instruments.
Instruments?
Practice math by doing math problems for homework.
And why do we practice things? This came up earlier, but why do we practice sports or instruments or math?
It's almost like you want it to become automatic. Like if you're playing an instrument, and now you don't have to think about it anymore.
To get to a point where we can just do something well without maybe putting as much energy into it? Are there other reasons that we might practice these things? Some other things?
Improving our skills.
Improving
How
skills?
good we are.
Yeah, so get really good at math, at instruments, at sports. So I want to read you a quote now about how we often practice unhelpful mental habits, or what the author calls practicing meanness to ourselves. Since kindness can be practiced, it's important to understand that its opposite attitude, meanness, can also be practiced. In fact, meanness is practiced quite a lot. Most often we aim it at ourselves. We usually don't fully recognize how mean we are to ourselves. This meanness is a habit of thinking and feeling that arises often and is felt deeply in the body. So have you ever thought about the idea of practicing meanness or practicing kindness? Have you thought about that idea? No? So what's new about that idea of practicing meanness or kindness? if you haven't thought about it before.
I mean, normally when we talk about practicing, we talked a lot about like things that we do maybe physically, so like, and then also I guess mentally with the math. But kindness and meanness are like virtues, and I've never thought about practicing those.
So thinking about them as virtues instead of behaviors, but they're really kind of both, right? Like that they're both, we think about somebody being a kind person, but also it's an act or a behavior you engage in. What else is new about the idea of practicing meanness or kindness?
I don't know how many people would practice meanness with intention to have a goal of becoming more mean, but it might fit in with the habit of like doing something often enough, then it becomes something you don't even think about anymore.
Yeah, so it may be something that we do automatically without thinking about it, but you're right, maybe we don't have the same goals. We don't wake up maybe in the morning and say, today, I'm gonna be better at beating myself up. But it's become so automatic that we do it without thinking. So we're gonna think a little bit more about the ways that we practice kindness and meanness. And I'm gonna hand out 2 pieces of paper and ask you to get in small groups of 2 or 3, and I'll give you a little bit more instructions in a minute about what you're gonna do here. Here's the second piece. So I'm giving you both pieces of paper for your reference, but I'm going to just have one group do one of these pages and the other group do the other one. So let's say on this side of the room, if you can look at that page to come up with ways that you care for yourself, that you practice kindness to yourself. So you see you have some different categories there. You have your thoughts, your actions, and your feelings. What are some thoughts, actions, and feelings, you guys, in terms of how you practice kindness to yourself? Does that make sense?
Sorry, can you repeat the
Yes.
instructions?
So you guys are thinking about thoughts, actions, and feelings in terms of how you take care of yourself. So you've got 2 pieces of paper, but you're only going to work on one of them. I just want you to see both of them. So you guys, how you care for yourself. And this group will be how you do not care for yourself. What are some things you engage in that maybe are practicing meanness towards yourself? So take a few minutes to work on that, and then we'll come back as a group.
Thoughts like,
That's how we don't take care of ourselves.
like shoulds, like I should be better at this.
Shouldn't, wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Telling yourself that you'll never get somewhere, like I'll never be as good as me.
Mhm.
Maybe
So
comparing
yeah,
thoughts.
comparing yourself.
Or I guess also parentheses, sometimes.
Criticizing yourself straight up.
Self-criticism.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Do you want actions?
Yeah. Not eating healthy.
I'm not sleeping.
Maybe one sounds like having gratitude.
Maybe overworking my body.
Overdoing it.
So for our purposes, take just another minute or so. Might give a little bit more time feeling in the folder, but
Self-doubt or like upset and angry with myself.
Yeah, self-doubt.
Exercise.
Eating well.
Being sad.
Not letting yourself feel stuff, like.
Avoidance.
Yeah.
Okay,
If you need to cry, just freaking let yourself cry.
I love our class presentation.
What class?
No, like if you feel like you need to cry, just cry. Like, can you imagine telling teens to do that? Like, I would cry during class presentations.
Oh,
Counselor, like seeking support.
I cried on stage one
when I was like in the show.
All right, so again,
Sounds good at that one, so I was like.
again, I'd probably give you more time if this were a real group program, but just for discussion, we're gonna come back as a group. And why don't we start, I'm hoping you can share with me some of the strategies or the behaviors that you came up with. Let's start with don't care. Things you do that do not take good care of yourself.
You said shitting all over yourself.
Yeah, you did say that.
I think I heard straight up, but we're straight up. Straight.
Shitting. So can you say a little bit more about that?
So like
That's
telling
great.
yourself you should do this or you should be like this.
Okay, so putting a lot of pressure, high expectations maybe that are. What else?
Comparing ourselves to others in like a self-deprecating way.
Comparison to others.
And self-criticism.
Okay. What about some other types of ways we don't care for ourselves on the list?
We said for actions like not eating well and not sleeping.
So not doing kind of the health behaviors that we know can keep us feeling good.
We also said like we might feel self-doubt or angry with ourselves.
Doubt or anger at yourself. Anything else on your list?
We might have like avoidance or suppression of feelings and also like isolating actions.
Avoid, suppress, isolate. Anything else anyone can think of as common ways that we don't take care of ourselves? Okay, what about ways we care for ourselves?
Positive self-talk.
Like what?
Just praising yourself for anything, your thoughts, what your body is or feels.
The saying those kind things to ourselves can be really helpful. What else?
Having confidence.
What else is on your list?
Having thoughts of forgiveness.
Were there other things?
We had practicing gratitude.
Any other ways we care for ourselves that you talked about?
Under actions, we had things like sleep and exercise.
So again, those healthy behaviors that we can engage in, either to not be kind to ourselves or be kind to ourselves.
Seeking out things that make us happy.
That's right, seek happy things. Kind of knowing what really makes us feel good and paying attention to it. Anything else you guys talked about?
Feelings, we talked about seeking support for when we're having unpleasant feelings.
So asking for help and being really kind to ourselves.
And then doing things to like cultivating pleasant feelings or maybe paying attention to noticing our pleasant feelings. Acknowledging.
So paying attention to those times in particular when we feel good can be really helpful and kind to ourselves. So what do you notice about these lists? What stands out to you?
The don't care side is a lot of like not enoughness or like what somebody's not doing. Noticing what they're not doing, actively not doing things that would be good for them.
So it's often the absence of good things that can be unkind to us. What else do you notice?
I feel like some things in the don't care side are easier. So like it's easier to compare yourself to people than it is to forgive someone that hurt you or yourself.
And why do you think it's easier for you or anybody else? If you agree with that. That seems easier to do some of these don't care things.
Because we practice them.
Because we practice them, yeah, so we're it's so ingrained that it's sometimes habitual to say the shoulds, to shoulding all over ourselves. Or comparing ourselves to others. Yeah, so we've been talking about doing things automatically, like mindlessly doing different behaviors, and so we can mindlessly be mean to ourselves and unkind to ourselves. And learning something new, so if we think it seemed like there was a lot of nodding about the idea that it might be easier to do these don't care things than these care things. Learning to behave in a new way, learning to be more kind to ourselves, just like anything else, involves paying attention and making choices to engage in that way. So how many of you ever learned something that you thought was going to be really hard? So raise your hands. What can anybody willing to share an example?
I learned how to play 2 musical instruments.
And so you went into that knowing that it was hard.
Mhm.
That it might be hard for you to do that. Anybody else? Playing 2 instruments?
Learning a new language.
New language? And what attitude did you have? Do you have to go into that to learn these, to learn a new language, learn to play multiple instruments? What kind of attitude did you have to do those things?
You have to know that you're not going to be good at it right away.
So maybe some forgiveness of self and reasonable expectations of like it's going to be, I'm not going to be great right away. What other kind of attitude did you need to have?
I told myself I'm just gonna try and see what happens.
So kind of some openness too, like I'll give it a shot and I'm going to deal with whatever comes my way.
Right, the non-judgmental. If you fail.
Not judgment if you fail, but also part of that, it sounds like, is knowing that one of the things that could happen is you could succeed. You could learn how to play 2 instruments, you could learn how to speak a new language, so that we also have to go into learning new things with the idea that we can change our behavior, we can change our thoughts, whatever it is. And so do you think if we practice healthier things, we can train our minds to be healthier? By engaging in new, healthier behaviors, does that change our minds, do you think? So I see some nodding, and we know from studies of the brain that that's true, that our brains can change. And if we engage in different behaviors like mindfulness, that can actually change the way that our minds and our brains work. And an important note also is that kindness or self-compassion doesn't mean being selfish, which sometimes people think self-compassion is putting yourself first, being selfish, not thinking about other people. But that's not it. It's a healthy mind habit that can be practiced, just like meanness to ourselves can be practiced, self-compassion can be practiced too. And so what do you think about the possibility of changing some of these mean mind habits that we talked about here into kinder mind habits? What do you think about that?
I think it's possible, but you have to notice that you're doing it.
So the first step is kind of attention and awareness on what you're doing before you can change it. Any other thoughts?
And similarly, just being really mindful about changing those types of mean mind habits, because I also not do it perfectly, so being forgiving and non-judgmental are efforts.
Be compassionate to ourselves about maybe not always being compassionate to ourselves.
Yes.
I was judging myself there, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Like that, and it takes time to change these habits, but having the mental attitude of it's possible. I can change. If I change my habits, I can change my mind and I can change my brain. All right, so we're going to pause here to do small group stuff, and then we will transition after that into cultivating gratitude and well-being. So we will split up, go into the other room, let's say maybe in about 10 or 15 minutes or so, maybe 12 and a half, so sit down the middle. Then we'll do some discussion before we transition into the second half of tea.
Because we only have cultivating well-being, right?
For the second,
For
first
this.
part of T?
What we're practicing?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.